Chapter 1. Why Ethics Matter. Introduction. Chapter Outline. 1.1 Being a Professional of Integrity. 1.2 Ethics and Profitability. 1.3 Multiple versus Single Ethical Standards. Ethics consists of the standards of behavior to which we hold ourselves in our personal and professional lives. It establishes the levels of honesty, empathy, and trustworthiness, and other virtues by which we hope to identify our personal behavior and our public reputation. In our personal lives, our ethics sets norms for the ways in which we interact with family and friends. In our professional lives, ethics guides our interactions with customers, clients, colleagues, employees, and shareholders affected by our business practices. Figure 1.1. Should we care about ethics in our lives? In our practices in business and the professions? That is the central question we will examine in this chapter and throughout the book. Our goal is to understand why the answer is yes. Whatever hopes you have for your future, you almost certainly want to be successful in whatever career you choose. But what does success mean to you, and how will you know you have achieved it? Will you measure it in terms of wealth, status, power, or recognition? Before blindly embarking on a quest to achieve these goals, which society considers important, stop and think about what a successful career means to you personally. Does it include a blameless reputation, colleagues whose good opinion you value, and the ability to think well of yourself? How might ethics guide your decision-making and contribute to your achievement of these goals? 1.1 Being a Professional of Integrity. Learning Objectives. By the end of this section, you will be able to describe the role of ethics in a business environment. Explain what it means to be a professional of integrity. Distinguish between ethical and legal responsibilities. Describe 3 approaches for examining the ethical nature of a decision. Whenever you think about the behavior you expect of yourself in your personal life and as a professional, you are engaging in a philosophical dialogue with yourself to establish the standards of behavior you choose to uphold, that is, your ethics. You may decide you should always tell the truth to family, friends, customers, clients, and shareholders, and if that is not possible, you should have very good reasons why you cannot. You may also choose never to defraud or mislead your business partners. You may decide as well that while you are pursuing profit in your business, you will not require that all the money on the table come your way. Instead, there might be some to go around to those who are important because they are affected one way or another by your business. These are your stakeholders. Acting with integrity. Clients, customers, suppliers, investors, retailers, employees, the media, the government, members of the surrounding community, competitors, and even the environment are stakeholders in a business. That is, they are individuals and entities affected by the business's decisions. Figure 1.2. Stakeholders typically value a leadership team that chooses the ethical way to accomplish the company's legitimate for-profit goals. For example, Patagonia expresses its commitment to environmentalism via its 1% for the Planet program, which donates 1% of all sales to help save the planet. In part because of this program, Patagonia has become a market leader in outdoor gear. Being successful at work may therefore consist of much more than simply earning money and promotions. It may also mean treating our employees, customers, and clients with honesty and respect. It may come from the sense of pride we feel about engaging in honest transactions, not just because the law demands it, but because we demand it of ourselves. It may lie in knowing the profit we make does not come from shortchanging others. Thus, business ethics guides the conduct by which companies and their agents abide by the law and respect the rights of their stakeholders, particularly their customers, clients, employees, and the surrounding community and environment. Ethical business conduct permits us to sleep well at night. Link to learning. Are business ethics an oxymoron? Read Why Ethics Matter to understand just a few of the reasons to have values-driven management. Nearly all systems of religious belief stress the building blocks of engaging others with respect, empathy, and honesty. These foundational beliefs, in turn, prepare us for the codes of ethical behavior that serve as ideal guides for business and the professions. Still, we need not subscribe to any religious faith to hold that ethical behavior in business is still necessary. Just by virtue of being human, we all share obligations to one another, and principal among these is the requirement that we treat others with fairness and dignity, including in our commercial transactions. For this reason, we use the words ethics and morals interchangeably in this book, though some philosophers distinguish between them. We hold that an ethical person conveys the same sense as a moral person, and we do not regard religious belief as a requirement for acting ethically in business and the professions. Because we are all humans and in the same world, we should extend the same behavior to all. It is the right way to behave, but it also burnishes our own professional reputation as business leaders of integrity. Integrity, that is, unity between what we say and what we do, is a highly valued trait. But it is more than just consistency of character. Acting with integrity means we adhere strongly to a code of ethics, so it implies trustworthiness and incorruptibility. Being a professional of integrity means consistently striving to be the best person you can be in all your interactions with others. It means you practice what you preach, walk the talk, and do what you believe is right based upon reason. Integrity in business brings many advantages, not the least of which is that it is a critical factor in allowing business and society to function properly. Successful corporate leaders and the companies they represent will take pride in their enterprise if they engage in business with honesty and fair play. To treat customers, clients, employees, and all those affected by a firm with dignity and respect is ethical. In addition, laudable business practices serve the long-term interests of corporations. Why? Because customers, clients, employees, and society at large will much more willingly patronize a business and work hard on its behalf if that business is perceived as caring about the community it serves. And what type of firm has long-term customers and employees? One whose track record gives evidence of honest business practice. Link to learning. In this interview, Mark Ferris, a white-collar criminal convicted of fraud, claims that greed, arrogance, and ambition were motivating factors in his actions. He also discusses the human ability to rationalize our behavior to justify it to ourselves. Note his proposed solutions: practicing ethical leadership and developing awareness at an individual level via corporate training. Many people confuse legal and ethical compliance. They are, however, totally different and call for different standards of behavior. The concepts are not interchangeable in any sense of the word. The law is needed to establish and maintain a functioning society. Without it, our society would be in chaos. Compliance with these legal standards is strictly mandatory. If we violate these standards, we are subject to punishment as established by the law. Therefore, compliance in terms of business ethics generally refers to the extent to which a company conducts its business operations in accordance with applicable regulations, statutes, and laws. Yet this represents only a baseline minimum. Ethical observance builds on this baseline and reveals the principles of an individual business leader or a specific organization. Ethical acts are generally considered voluntary and personal, often based on our perception of or stand on right and wrong. Some professions, such as medicine and the law, have traditional codes of ethics. The Hippocratic Oath, for example, is embraced by most professionals in healthcare today as an appropriate standard always owed to patients by physicians, nurses, and others in the field. This obligation traces its lineage to ancient Greece and the physician Hippocrates. Business is different in not having a mutually shared standard of ethics. This is changing, however, as evidenced by the array of codes of conduct and mission statements many companies have adopted over the past century. These have many points in common, and their shared content may eventually produce a code universally claimed by business practitioners. What central point might constitute such a code? Essentially, a commitment to treat with honesty and integrity customers, clients, employees, and others affiliated with a business. The law is typically indebted to tradition and precedents, and compelling reasons are needed to support any change. Ethical reasoning often is more topical and reflects the changes in consciousness that individuals and society undergo. Often, ethical thought precedes and sets the stage for changes in the law. Behaving ethically requires that we meet the mandatory standards of the law, but that is not enough. For example, an action may be legal that we personally consider unacceptable. Companies today need to be focused not only on complying with the letter of the law, but also on going above and beyond that basic mandatory requirement to consider their stakeholders and do what is right. Link to learning. To see an example of a corporate ethical code or mission statement, visit Johnson & Johnson and read Our Credo, written by former Chair Robert Wood Johnson. Forbes provides an annual list of companies recently deemed the most ethical according to their standards and research. Ends, means, and character in business. How then should we behave? Philosophy and science help us answer this question. From philosophy, 3 different perspectives help us assess whether our decisions are ethical on the basis of reason. These perspectives are called normative ethical theories and focus on how people ought to behave. We discuss them in this chapter and in later chapters. In contrast, descriptive ethical theories are based on scientific evidence, primarily in the field of psychology, and describe how people tend to behave within a particular context. However, they are not the subject of this book. The first normative approach is to examine the ends or consequences a decision produces in order to evaluate whether those ends are ethical. Variations on this approach include utilitarianism, teleology, and consequentialism. For example, utilitarianism suggests that an ethical action is one whose consequence achieves the greatest good for the greatest number of people. So if we want to make an ethical decision, we should ask ourselves who is helped and who is harmed by it. Focusing on consequences in this way generally does not require us to take into account the means of achieving that particular end, however. That fact leads us to the second normative theory about what constitutes ethical conduct. The second approach does examine the means or actions we use to carry out a business decision. An example of this approach is deontology, which essentially suggests that it is the means that lend nobility to the ends. Deontology contends that each of us owes certain duties to others. Deon is a Greek word for duty or obligation, and that certain universal rules apply to every situation and bind us to these duties. In this view, whether our actions are ethical depends only on whether we adhere to these rules. Thus, the means we use is the primary determinant of ethical conduct. The thinker most closely associated with deontology is the 18th century German philosopher Immanuel Kant, Figure 1.3. The third normative approach, typically called virtue theory, focuses on the character of the decision-maker, a character that reflects the training we receive growing up. In this view, our ethical analysis of a decision is intimately connected with the person we choose to be. It is through the development of habits, the routine actions in which we choose to engage, that we are able to create a character of integrity and make ethical decisions. Put differently, if a 2-year-old is taught to take care of and return borrowed toys, even though this runs contrary to every instinct they have, they may continue to perfect their ethical behavior, so that at age 40, they can be counted on to safeguard the tens of millions of dollars investors have entrusted to their care in brokerages. Virtue theory has its roots in the Greek philosophical tradition, whose followers sought to learn how to live a flourishing life through study, teaching, and practice. The cardinal virtues to be practiced were courage, self-control, justice, and wisdom. Socrates was often cited as a sage and a role model, whose conduct in life was held in high regard. Ethics across time and cultures. Aristotle and the concept of phronesis, or practical wisdom. Phronesis, is a type of practical wisdom that enables us to act virtuously. In The Big Idea, The Wise Leader, a Harvard Business Review article on leadership and ethical decision-making, Ikejiro Nonaka, a Japanese organizational theorist, and Hirotaka Takeuchi, a professor of management practice at Harvard Business School, discuss the gap between the theory and practice of ethics and which characteristics make a wise leader. The authors conclude that the use of explicit and tacit knowledge isn't enough. Chief executive officers, CEOs, must also draw on a third, often forgotten kind of knowledge, called practical wisdom. Practical wisdom is tacit knowledge acquired from experience that enables people to make prudent judgments and take actions based on the actual situation, guided by values and morals. The concept of practical wisdom dates back to Aristotle, who considered phronesis, which can also be defined as prudence, to be a key intellectual virtue. Phronesis enables people to make ethically sound judgments. According to the authors, phronetic leaders practice moral discernment in every situation, making judgments for the common good that are guided by their individual values and ethics. Quickly assess situations and envision the consequences of possible actions or responses. Create a shared sense of purpose among executives and employees, and inspire people to work together in pursuit of a common goal. Engage as many people as possible in conversation and communicate using metaphors, stories, and other figurative language in a way that everyone can understand, and encourage practical wisdom in others and support the training of employees at all levels in its use. In essence, the first question any company should ask itself is, do we have a moral purpose? Having a moral purpose requires focusing on the common good, which precedes the accumulation of profit and results in economic and social benefits. If companies seek the common good, profits generally will follow. Critical thinking. In the article cited, the authors stress the importance of being well versed in the liberal arts, such as philosophy, history, literature, and in the fine arts to cultivate judgment. How do you think a strong background in the liberal arts would impart practical wisdom or help you make ethical decisions? 1.2 Ethics and Profitability. Learning objectives. By the end of this section, you will be able to differentiate between short-term and long-term perspectives. Differentiate between stockholder and stakeholder. Discuss the relationship among ethical behavior, goodwill, and profit. Explain the concept of corporate social responsibility. Few directives in business can override the core mission of maximizing shareholder wealth, and today that particularly means increasing quarterly profits. Such an intense focus on one variable over a short time, i.e., a short-term perspective, leads to a short-sighted view of what constitutes business success. Measuring true profitability, however, requires taking a long-term perspective. We cannot accurately measure success within a quarter of a year. A longer time is often required for a product or service to find its market and gain traction against competitors, or for the effects of a new business policy to be felt. Satisfying consumers' demands, going green, being socially responsible, and acting above and beyond the basic requirements all take time and money. However, the extra cost and effort will result in profits in the long run. If we measure success from this longer perspective, we are more likely to understand the positive effect ethical behavior has on all who are associated with a business. Profitability and success, thinking long-term. Decades ago, some management theorists argued that a conscientious manager in a for-profit setting acts ethically by emphasizing solely the maximization of earnings. Today, most commentators contend that ethical business leadership is grounded in doing right by all stakeholders directly affected by a firm's operations, including, but not limited to, stockholders, or those who own shares of the company's stock. That is, business leaders do right when they give thought to what is best for all who have a stake in their companies. Not only that, firms actually reap greater material success when they take such an approach, especially over the long run. Nobel Prize-winning economist Milton Friedman stated in a now famous New York Times Magazine article in 1970 that the only social responsibility of a business is to increase its profits. This concept took hold in business and even in business school education. However, although it is certainly permissible and even desirable for a company to pursue profitability as a goal, managers must also have an understanding of the context within which their business operates and of how the wealth they create can add positive value to the world. The context within which they act is society, which permits and facilitates a firm's existence. Thus, a company enters a social contract with society as whole, an implicit agreement among all members to cooperate for social benefits. Even as a company pursues the maximizing of stockholder profit, it must also acknowledge that all of society will be affected to some extent by its operations. In return for society's permission to incorporate and engage in business, a company owes a reciprocal obligation to do what is best for as many of society's members as possible, regardless of whether they are stockholders. Therefore, when applied specifically to a business, the social contract implies that a company gives back to the society that permits it to exist, benefiting the community at the same time it enriches itself. Link to learning. What happens when a bank decides to break the social contract? This press conference, held by the National Whistleblowers Center, describes the events surrounding the $104 million whistleblower reward given to former UBS employee Bradley Birkenfeld by the U.S. Internal Revenue Service. While employed at UBS, Switzerland's largest bank, Birkenfeld assisted in the company's illegal offshore tax business, and he later served 40 months in prison for conspiracy. But he was also the original source of incriminating information that led to a Federal Bureau of Investigation examination of the bank, and to the U.S. government's decision to impose a $780 million fine on UBS in 2009. In addition, Birkenfeld turned over to investigators the account information of more than 4,500 U.S. private clients of UBS. In addition to taking this more nuanced view of profits, managers must also use a different time frame for obtaining them. Wall Street's focus on periodic, i.e., quarterly and annual earnings, has led many managers to adopt a short-term perspective, which fails to take into account effects that require a longer time to develop. For example, charitable donations in the form of corporate assets or employees' volunteered time may not show a return on investment until a sustained effort has been maintained for years. A long-term perspective is a more balanced view of profit maximization that recognizes that the impacts of a business decision may not manifest for a longer time. As an example, consider the business practices of Toyota when it first introduced its vehicles for sale in the United States in 1957. For many years, Toyota was content to sell its cars at a slight loss because it was accomplishing two business purposes. It was establishing a long-term relationship of trust with those who eventually would become its loyal U.S. customers, and it was attempting to disabuse U.S. consumers of their belief that items made in Japan were cheap and unreliable. The company accomplished both goals by patiently playing its long game, a key aspect of its operational philosophy, the Toyota Way, which includes a specific emphasis on long-term business goals, even at the expense of short-term profit. What contributes to a corporation's positive image over the long term? Many factors contribute, including a reputation for treating customers and employees fairly and for engaging in business honestly. Companies that act in this way may emerge from any industry or country. Examples include Fluor, the large U.S. engineering and design firm; Illycaf, the Italian food and beverage purveyor; Marriott, the giant U.S. hotelier; and Nokia, the Finnish telecommunications retailer. The upshot is that when consumers are looking for an industry leader to patronize, and would-be employees are seeking a firm to join, companies committed to ethical business practices are often the first to come to mind. Why should stakeholders care about a company acting above and beyond the ethical and legal standards set by society? Simply put, being ethical is simply good business. A business is profitable for many reasons, including expert management teams, focused and happy employees, and worthwhile products and services that meet consumer demand. One more and very important reason is that they maintain a company philosophy and mission to do good for others. Year after year, the nation's most admired companies are also among those that had the highest profit margins. Going green, funding charities, and taking a personal interest in employee happiness levels adds to the bottom line. Consumers want to use companies that care for others and our environment. During the years 2008 and 2009, many unethical companies went bankrupt. However, those companies that avoided the quick buck risky and unethical investments, and other unethical business practices often flourished. If nothing else, consumer feedback on social media sites such as Yelp and Facebook can damage an unethical company's prospects. Cases from the real world. Competition and the markers of business success. Perhaps you are still thinking about how you would define success in your career. For our purposes here, let us say that success consists simply of achieving our goals. We each have the ability to choose the goals we hope to accomplish in business, of course, and if we have chosen them with integrity, our goals and the actions we take to achieve them will be in keeping with our character. Warren Buffett, Figure 1.4, whom many consider the most successful investor of all time, is an exemplar of business excellence, as well as a good potential role model for professionals of integrity and the art of thinking long-term. He had the following to say: ultimately, there's one investment that supersedes all others: invest in yourself. Nobody can take away what you've got in yourself, and everybody has potential they haven't used yet. You'll have a much more rewarding life, not only in terms of how much money you make, but how much fun you have out of life. You'll make more friends the more interesting person you are, so go to it, invest in yourself. The primary principle under which Buffett instructs managers to operate is, do nothing you would not be happy to have an unfriendly but intelligent reporter write about on the front page of a newspaper. This is a very simple and practical guide to encouraging ethical business behavior on a personal level. Buffett offers another, equally wise principle: lose money for the firm, even a lot of money, and I will be understanding. Lose reputation for the firm, even a shred of reputation, and I will be ruthless. As we saw in the example of Toyota, the importance of establishing and maintaining trust in the long term cannot be underestimated. Link to learning. For more on Warren Buffett's thoughts about being both an economic and ethical leader, watch this interview that appeared on the PBS NewsHour on June 6, 2017. Stockholders, stakeholders, and goodwill. Earlier in this chapter, we explained that stakeholders are all the individuals and groups affected by a business's decisions. Among these stakeholders are stockholders or shareholders, individuals and institutions that own stock or shares in a corporation. Understanding the impact of a business decision on the stockholder and various other stakeholders is critical to the ethical conduct of business. Indeed, prioritizing the claims of various stakeholders in the company is one of the most challenging tasks business professionals face. Considering only stockholders can often result in unethical decisions. The impact on all stakeholders must be considered and rationally assessed. Managers do sometimes focus predominantly on stockholders, especially those holding the largest number of shares, because these powerful individuals and groups can influence whether managers keep their jobs or are dismissed, e.g., when they are held accountable for the company's missing projected profit goals. And many believe the sole purpose of a business is, in fact, to maximize stockholders' short-term profits. However, considering only stockholders and short-term impacts on them is one of the most common errors business managers make. It is often in the long-term interests of a business not to accommodate stock owners alone, but rather to take into account a broad array of stakeholders and the long-term and short-term consequences for a course of action. Here is a simple strategy for considering all your stakeholders in practice. Divide your screen or page into 3 columns. In the first column, list all stakeholders in order of perceived priority, Figure 1.5. Some individuals and groups play more than one role. For instance, some employees may be stockholders, some members of the community may be suppliers, and the government may be a customer of the firm. In the second column, list what you think each stakeholder group's interests and goals are. For those that play more than one role, choose the interests most directly affected by your actions. In the third column, put the likely impact of your business decision on each stakeholder. This basic spreadsheet should help you identify all your stakeholders and evaluate your decision's impact on their interests. If you would like to add a human dimension to your analysis, try assigning some of your colleagues to the role of stakeholders and re-examine your analysis. The positive feeling stakeholders have for any particular company is called goodwill, which is an important component of almost any business entity, even though it is not directly attributable to the company's assets and liabilities. Among other intangible assets, goodwill might include the worth of a business's reputation, the value of its brand name, the intellectual capital and attitude of its workforce, and the loyalty of its established customer base. Even being socially responsible generates goodwill. The ethical behavior of managers will have a positive influence on the value of each of those components. Goodwill cannot be earned or created in a short time, but it can be the key to success and profitability. A company's name, its corporate logo, and its trademark will necessarily increase in value as stakeholders view that company in a more favorable light. A good reputation is essential for success in the modern business world, and with information about the company and its actions readily available via mass media and the internet, e.g., on public rating sites such as Yelp, management's values are always subject to scrutiny and open debate. These values affect the environment outside and inside the company. The corporate culture, for instance, consists of shared beliefs, values, and behaviors that create the internal or organizational context within which managers and employees interact. Practicing ethical behavior at all levels, from CEO to upper and middle management to general employees, helps cultivate an ethical corporate culture and ethical employee relations. What would you do? Which corporate culture do you value? Imagine that upon graduation, you have the good fortune to be offered 2 job opportunities. The first is with a corporation known to cultivate a hard-nosed, no-nonsense business culture in which keeping long hours and working intensely are highly valued. At the end of each year, the company donates to numerous social and environmental causes. The second job opportunity is with a nonprofit recognized for a very different culture, based on its compassionate approach to employee work-life balance. It also offers the chance to pursue your own professional interests or volunteerism during a portion of every workday. The first job offer pays 20% more per year. Critical thinking. Which of these opportunities would you pursue and why? How important an attribute is salary, and at what point would a higher salary override for you the non-monetary benefits of the lower-paid position? Positive goodwill generated by ethical business practices, in turn, generates long-term business success. As recent studies have shown, the most ethical and enlightened companies in the United States consistently outperform their competitors. Thus, viewed from the proper long-term perspective, conducting business ethically is a wise business decision that generates goodwill for the company among stakeholders, contributes to a positive corporate culture, and ultimately supports profitability. You can test the validity of this claim yourself. When you choose a company with which to do business, what factors influence your choice? Let us say you are looking for a financial advisor for your investments and retirement planning, and you have found several candidates whose credentials, experience, and fees are approximately the same. Yet one of these firms stands above the others because it has a reputation, which you discover is well earned, for telling clients the truth and recommending investments that seem centered on the client's benefit and not on potential profit for the firm. Wouldn't this be the one you would trust with your investments? Or suppose one group of financial advisors has a long track record of giving back to the community of which it is part. It donates to charitable organizations in local neighborhoods, and its members volunteer service hours toward worthy projects in town. Would this group not strike you as the one worthy of your investments? That it appears to be committed to building up the local community might be enough to persuade you to give it your business. This is exactly how a long-term investment in community goodwill can produce a long pipeline of potential clients and customers. Cases from the real world. The Equifax data breach. In 2017, from mid-May to July, hackers gained unauthorized access to servers used by Equifax, a major credit reporting agency, and accessed the personal information of nearly one-half the U.S. population. Equifax executives sold off nearly $2 million of company stock they owned after finding out about the hack in late July, weeks before it was publicly announced on September 7, 2017, in potential violation of insider trading rules. The company's shares fell nearly 14% after the announcement, but few expect Equifax managers to be held liable for their mistakes, face any regulatory discipline, or pay any penalties for profiting from their actions. To make amends to customers and clients in the aftermath of the hack, the company offered free credit monitoring and identity theft protection. On September 15, 2017, the company's chief information officer and chief of security retired. On September 26, 2017, the CEO resigned, days before he was to testify before Congress about the breach. To date, numerous government investigations and hundreds of private lawsuits have been filed as a result of the hack. Critical thinking. Which elements of this case might involve issues of legal compliance? Which elements illustrate acting legally but not ethically? What would acting ethically and with personal integrity in this situation look like? How do you think this breach will affect Equifax's position relative to those of its competitors? How might it affect the future success of the company? Was it sufficient for Equifax to offer online privacy protection to those whose personal information was hacked? What else might it have done? A brief introduction to corporate social responsibility. If you truly appreciate the positions of your various stakeholders, you will be well on your way to understanding the concept of corporate social responsibility, CSR. CSR is the practice by which a business views itself within a broader context as a member of society with certain implicit social obligations and environmental responsibilities. As previously stated, there is a distinct difference between legal compliance and ethical responsibility, and the law does not fully address all ethical dilemmas that businesses face. CSR ensures that a company is engaging in sound ethical practices and policies in accordance with the company's culture and mission, above and beyond any mandatory legal standards. A business that practices CSR cannot have maximizing shareholder wealth as its sole purpose, because this goal would necessarily infringe on the rights of other stakeholders in the broader society. For instance, a mining company that disregards its corporate social responsibility may infringe on the right of its local community to clean air and water if it pursues only profit. In contrast, CSR places all stakeholders within a proper contextual framework. An additional perspective to take concerning CSR is that ethical business leaders opt to do good at the same time that they do well. This is a simplistic summation, but it speaks to how CSR plays out within any corporate setting. The idea is that a corporation is entitled to make money, but it should not only make money. It should also be a good civic neighbor and commit itself to the general prospering of society as a whole. It ought to make the communities of which it is part better, at the same time it pursues legitimate profit goals. These ends are not mutually exclusive, and it is possible, indeed praiseworthy, to strive for both. When a company approaches business in this fashion, it is engaging in a commitment to corporate social responsibility. Link to learning. U.S. entrepreneur Blake McCoskey has created a unique business model combining both for-profit and non-profit philosophies in an innovative demonstration of corporate social responsibility. The company he founded, Tom's Shoes, donates one pair of shoes to a child in need for every pair sold. As of May 2018, the company has provided more than 75 million pairs of shoes to children in 70 countries. 1.3 Multiple versus single ethical standards. Learning objectives. By the end of this section, you will be able to analyze ethical norms and values as they relate to business standards. Explain the doctrine of ethical relativism and why it is problematic. Evaluate the claim that having a single ethical standard makes behaving consistently easier. Business people sometimes apply different ethical standards in different contexts, especially if they are working in a culture different from the one in which they were raised or with coworkers from other traditions. If we look outside ourselves for ethical guidance, relying on the context in which we find ourselves, we can grow confused about what is ethical business behavior. Stakeholders then observe that the messages we send via our conduct lack a consistent ethical core, which can harm our reputation and that of the business. To avoid falling back on ethical relativism, a philosophy according to which there is no right or wrong, and what is ethical depends solely on the context, we must choose a coherent standard we can apply to all our interactions with others. Some people who adopt multiple ethical standards may choose to exhibit the highest standards with their families because these are the people they most revere. In a business setting, however, this same person may choose to be an unethical actor whose sole goal is the ruthless accumulation of wealth by any means. Because work and family are not the only two settings in which we live our lives, such a person may behave according to yet another standard to competitors in a sporting event, to strangers on the street, or to those in his or her religious community. Although the ethical standard we adopt is always a choice, certain life experiences can have more profound effects on our choice than others. Among the most formative experiences are family upbringing and cultural traditions, broadly defined here to include religious and ethnic norms, the standard patterns of behavior within the context in which we live. Culture and family also influence each other because the family exists in and responds to its cultural context, as well as providing us with the bedrock for our deepest values. Regardless of this initial coding, however, we can choose the ethical standards we apply in the business context. Why should we choose a single ethical code for all the contexts in which we live? The Greek philosophers and later proponents of the normative ethical theories we discussed earlier would say that if you apply your reason to determine how to behave, it makes rational sense to abide by a single ethical code for all interactions with all persons in all contexts. By doing so, you maximize your ethical behavior no matter who the other party is. Furthermore, you have an internally consistent behavior for all family, friends, customers, clients, and anyone else with whom you interact. Thus, we need not choose different values in different contexts, and when people see us in different situations, they are more likely to trust us because they see we uphold the same values regardless of the context. Indeed, proponents of all the normative ethical theories would insist that the only rational choice is to have a single ethical standard. A deontologist would argue that you should adhere to particular duties in performing your actions, regardless of the parties with whom you interact. A utilitarian would say that any act you take should result in the greatest good for the greatest number. A virtue ethicist would state that you cannot be virtuous if you lack integrity in your behavior toward all. Adopting a consistent ethical standard is both selfless and in the manager's self-interest. That is, would-be customers and clients are more likely to seek out a business that treats all with whom it interacts with honesty and fairness, believing that they themselves will be treated likewise by that firm. Similarly, business leaders who treat everyone in a trustworthy manner need never worry that they might not have impressed a potential customer, because they always engage in honorable commercial practices. A single standard of business behavior that emphasizes respect and good service appeals to all. Normative ethics is about discovering right and delineating it from wrong. It is a way to develop the rules and norms we use to guide meaningful decision-making. The ethics in our single code are not relative to the time, person, or place. In this world, we all wear different hats as we go about our daily lives as employees, parents, leaders, students. Being a truly ethical person requires that no matter what hat we wear, we exhibit a single ethical code, and that it includes, among others, such universal principles of behavior as honesty, integrity, loyalty, fairness, respect for law, and respect for others. Yet another reason to adopt a universal ethical standard is the transparent character it nurtures in us. If a company's leadership insists that it stands for honest business transactions at every turn, it cannot prosecute those who defraud the company and look the other way when its own officers do the same. Stakeholders recognize such hypocrisy and rightly hold it against the business's leaders. Business leaders are not limited to only one of the normative ethical theories we have described, however. Virtue theory, utilitarianism, and deontology all have advantages to recommend them. Still, what should not change is a corporate commitment to not make exceptions in its practices when those favor the company at the expense of customers, clients, or other stakeholders. Moving from theory to daily life, we can also look at the way our reputation is established by the implicit and explicit messages we send to others. If we adopt ethical relativism, friends, family, and coworkers will notice that we use different standards for different contexts. This lack of consistency and integrity can alter their perception of us and likely damage our reputation. What would you do? Taking advantage of an employee discount. Suppose you work in retail sales for an international clothing company. A perk of the job is an employee discount of 25% on all merchandise you purchase for personal use. Your cousin, who is always looking for a bargain, approaches you in the store one day and implores you to give him your employee discount on a $100 purchase of clothes for himself. Critical thinking. How would you handle this situation and why? Would it matter if the relative were someone closer to you, perhaps a brother or sister? If so, why? Key terms. Business ethics. The conduct by which companies and their agents abide by the law and respect the rights of their stakeholders, particularly their customers, clients, employees, and the surrounding community and environment. Compliance. The extent to which a company conducts its business operations in accordance with applicable regulation and statutes. Corporate culture. The shared beliefs, values, and behaviors that create the organizational context within which employees and managers interact. Corporate social responsibility, CSR. The practice in which a business views itself within a broader context as a member of society with certain implicit social obligations and responsibility for its own effects on environmental and social well-being. Deontology. A normative ethical theory suggesting that an ethical decision requires us to observe only the rights and duties we owe to others, and, in the context of business, act on the basis of a primary motive to do what is right by all stakeholders. Ethical relativism. A view that ethics depends entirely upon context. Ethics. The standards of behavior to which we hold ourselves in our personal and professional lives. Goodwill. The value of a business beyond its tangible assets, usually including its reputation, the value of its brand, the attitude of its workforce, and customer relations. Integrity. The adherence to a code of moral values implying trustworthiness and incorruptibility because there is unity between what we say and what we do. Long-term perspective. A broad view of profit maximization that recognizes the fact that the impact of a business decision may not manifest for a long time. Normative ethical theories. A group of philosophical theories that describe how people ought to behave on the basis of reason. Shareholder. An individual or institution that owns stock or shares in a corporation, by definition a type of stakeholder, also called stockholder. Short-term perspective. A focus on the goal of maximizing periodic, i.e., quarterly and annual profits. Social contract. An implicit agreement among societal members to cooperate for social benefit. When applied specifically to a business, it suggests a company that responsibly gives back to the society that permits it to incorporate, benefiting the community at the same time that it enriches itself. Stakeholders. Individuals and entities affected by a business's decisions, including customers, suppliers, investors, employees, the community, and the environment, among others. Stockholder. An individual or institution that owns stock or shares in a corporation, by definition a type of stakeholder, also called shareholder. Utilitarianism. A normative theory of ethics, suggesting that an ethical act is the one whose consequences create the greatest good for the greatest number of people. Virtue theory. A normative theory that focuses on proper conduct, guided by the training we received growing up. Summary. 1.1 Being a professional of integrity. Ethics sets the standards that govern our personal and professional behavior. To conduct business ethically, we must choose to be a professional of integrity. The first steps are to ask ourselves how we define success and to understand that integrity calls on us to act in a way that is consistent with our words. There is a distinct difference between legal compliance and ethical responsibility, and the law does not fully address all ethical dilemmas that businesses face. Sound ethical practice meets the company's culture, mission, or policies above and beyond legal responsibilities. The three normative theories of ethical behavior allow us to apply reason to business decisions as we examine the result, utilitarianism, the means of achieving it, deontology, and whether our choice will help us develop a virtuous character, virtue ethics. 1.2 Ethics and Profitability. A long-term view of business success is critical for accurately measuring profitability. All the company's stakeholders benefit from managers' ethical conduct, which also increases a business's goodwill and in turn supports profitability. Customers and clients tend to trust a business that gives evidence of its commitment to a positive long-term impact. By exercising corporate social responsibility, or CSR, a business views itself within a broader context as a member of society with certain implicit social obligations and responsibility for its own effects on environmental and social well-being. 1.3 Multiple versus single ethical standards. The adoption of a single ethical code is the mark of a professional of integrity and is supported by the reasoned approach of each of the normative theories of business ethics. When we consistently maintain the same values regardless of the context, we are more likely to engender trust among those with whom we interact. Assessment questions. 1. Which of these concepts relates to utilitarianism? Consequences. Actions. Character. Duty. 2. True or false? According to the Greek system of logic introduced by Socrates, normative ethical theories ultimately are grounded in reason. 3. Explain why ethical responsibilities go beyond legal compliance. 4. Describe the difference between normative and descriptive ethical theories. 5. Which of the following is not a stakeholder? The media, corporate culture, the environment, customers. 6. True or false? According to Milton Friedman, a company's social responsibility consists solely of bettering the welfare of society. 7. What is corporate social responsibility, CSR? 8. Describe a practical way to prioritize the claims of stakeholders. 9. Describe how a company's ethical business practices affect its goodwill. 10. True or false? Family is generally a strong influence on our ethical standards. 11. Which normative ethical theory supports the idea of holding multiple ethical standards? Deontology, utilitarianism, virtue ethics. None of the above. 12. Describe the benefits of having a single ethical standard.